Hi, it's Katrina. History books might be missing a few chapters. What if there was a time before recorded history with a world of advanced civilizations before us? From the city buried beneath Missouri in a cave to the civilization that predates even the Sumerians, I have a lot to show you. Imagine structures so colossal, so intricate they seem impossible for humans to have built with the technology of their time. Take a look and then let me know in the comments what you think about the potential evidence that a pre-flood civilization existed. This civilization predates the Sumerians. Humanity is apparently a species with amnesia. The greatest scientists in the world still can't figure out the full timeline of our history here on planet Earth. But maybe scientists aren't looking in the right place. Maybe it's time to check in with the ancient Sumerians. The Sumerians had no illusions about their history on this planet. They knew exactly when they arrived on the planet, how it all went down, and how they were destroyed by a global flood. What I'm about to tell you is the shocking history of the human race according to Sumerian mythology. Whether you accept it as fact is up to you. It began 450,000 years ago, roughly the same time Dr. Alexander Koltepin claims the underground cities of Turkey were occupied. On planet Nibiru, located far away in our solar system, a calamity was unfolding. The planet's atmosphere was eroding, and they were in desperate need of material. The advanced civilization on Nibiru traveled to planet Earth, with Enki as their leader. They established Eridu as their first city. Right away, they got to work extracting gold from the Persian Gulf. Over the next 20,000 years or so, more of these aliens arrived on the planet. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. Enki was still in charge. His sister Ninhursag arrived, and then came his brother Enlil. Mines were established in southern Africa and across most of Mesopotamia. By 400,000 years ago, there were 7 major settlements. There was a spaceport in Sippar, a control center in Nippur, and a processing facility in Shurupak. During this time, there was a lot of conflict between the Anunnaki. The ones forced to work in the mines weren't happy about it, so they rebelled. Enki and Ninhursag created primitive workers by genetically manipulating the apes already in existence on the planet. This created a semi-intelligent race of workers to slave in the mines. These primitive workers were Homo sapiens, but there may have been others. It may have taken a few different tries to get the workers sufficiently intelligent and capable of mining gold. This could account for the existence of Neanderthals, Denisovans, etc. Fast forward 100,000 years, Homo sapiens are smarter than the Anunnaki had anticipated and have multiplied a lot. The planet started to cool, and the Anunnaki started hooking up with humans. By 75,000 years ago, a new ice age was in full swing. The humans and Anunnaki had mixed their genes enough that there was a hybrid civilization beginning to dominate the planet. This drew the fury of Enlil, who did not like the mixing of the species. He decided he was going to wipe out humanity and the mixed Anunnaki humans, which he saw as abominations. In 11,000 BC, Enlil allowed a flood to sweep over the entire planet. Everyone would have been destroyed if Enki hadn't warned Ziusudra. With Enki's help, Ziusudra built a special submersible ship to survive the flood. Everyone was wiped out except for Ziusudra and a select few who were on his boat, essentially restarting human life on this planet. Does this story sound familiar to you? This is more or less what the ancient Sumerian scripture tells us. It seems like a strange crossover between science fiction and ancient mythology. It's the one theory for the creation of human life that mainstream scientists don't accept as real. It's just a story. Where is all the evidence to suggest that this really happened? And why is this mythology taken differently than the stories from Greek mythology, for example? Believers in the ancient Anunnaki theory argue the reason there are so few ruins from the first 400,000 years of activity on the planet is that Enlil annihilated it all. There are only bits and pieces of evidence now, like megaliths that clearly don't fit in the accepted historical timeline. So what do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. Million-year-old underground complex. How old do you think advanced human civilization is? Is it around 12,000 years old, like researchers say? Or is it hundreds of thousands of years old, like some scientists are starting to suspect? After what I have to show you right now, I have a hunch you won't know what to think. But first, let me introduce you to Dr. Alexander Koltepin. the director of the Natural Science Research Center in Moscow. He is one of the believers in civilization having emerged millions of years before today. His expertise lies in ancient underground structures. He has studied these structures, most of them around the Mediterranean, and found some jarring similarities. Alexander's studies have revealed that the ancient subterranean complexes were once connected. Their composition, their weathering, and their architecture has led Alexander to one conclusion. They were built by an advanced civilization that predates modern human civilization by a lot. Don't worry, I have examples lined up to show you. In central Israel, near the ruins of Hervat Bergen, Alexander studied strange underground structures littered with the fallen debris of megaliths. As he looked over the ancient complex, he was reminded of Kabusin, a rock city that he studied in Turkey. At another Turkish site called Göbekli, Alexander identified building materials between 500,000 and 1 million years old. This is in direct opposition of mainstream archaeologists. They dated the underground structures at Göbekli to the Middle Ages, hardly 500 years ago. So how can there be such a discrepancy between what two groups of scientists are saying? It might be because Alexander sees things that mainstream scientists aren't looking for. For example, Alexander said the structures at Göbekli were made using certain types of volcanic basalts. But the last time a volcano was active in the region to provide the basalts, a word that sounds like bath salts if you say it too fast, was more than 500,000 years ago. Then there's the fact that a lot of these underground complexes appear to have been underwater for a really long time. I mentioned that Alexander was at Kabusin, but I want to elaborate on something. Kabusin is an ancient village in the Cappadocia region of Turkey that is partly underground and partly exposed. Cappadocia is full of these semi-underground cities. The most famous one is Derinkuyu, which I've talked about a lot on the channel, but there is one thing I've never mentioned. Derinkuyu may have once been below sea level. Take a look at this picture, courtesy of Alexander himself. What you're seeing is, according to Alexander, sediments of lithified and calcareous clay deposits. In less scientific terms, the floor looks like it was underwater for thousands of years. What if the not-so-mainstream scientists are right about the megalithic structures? Maybe they were built a million years ago. However, because people lived in them more recently, archaeologists and historians have mistaken them for being modern. Alexander believes the underground cities of Turkey were all connected through passages that have long since collapsed. They weren't individual cities, but one massive prehistoric complex. Living inside the underground complex was a society of prehistoric people that predate every other known civilization in the world. Do you think this could have been possible? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And now for number 9, but first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Deboo7ish and Destiny99 for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day or night, depending on where you are. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Kaimanawa Wall, real or imaginary? In 1996, the entire history of New Zealand, and indeed the world, was flipped on its head. Respected archaeologist Barry Brailsford announced the discovery of a huge stone wall. It appeared older than the Maori's arrival in New Zealand more than 2,000 years ago. Nobody knew precisely how old this stone wall was, but it looked to be antediluvian. There were rumors and whispers that it was built by a civilization before the biblical flood. Take a look at this image from the New Zealand Herald. That kid in the orange sweater has his hands pressed up against one of the megalithic blocks that forms the wall. Just look at all the moss stuck to the stones. Notice the vegetation growing from the tops, as if they had been buried under the forest for thousands of years. When these blocks were discovered in the 1990s, people were blown away. The site became so popular that you couldn't even see the wall because it was so crowded by tourists. Then came the disappointment. Later in 1996, regional archaeologist Neville Ritchie showed up to spoil everybody's fun. He claimed the wall in Kaimanawa, New Zealand was not a wall at all. He identified it as an ignimbrite outcrop, formed by a volcanic rock flow 330,000 years ago. Neville said that when the rock flow cooled and cracked, it left the appearance of being a stone wall. That's a pretty big bummer, right? Yes, but only if you believe it. That was Neville's hypothesis, but it didn't mean it was true. It was just, his opinion. Barry Brailsford was not impressed with it. Barry was adamant that the 8 square blocks were part of a carefully built structure, not a natural occurrence. Barry brought his own geologist to the site, like bringing his mom to back him up on the playground. And that was exactly what happened. Barry's geologist claimed the wall was not a natural formation. From that point on, speculation ran wild. People were saying there had been pyramid builders in New Zealand. There was a culture there prior to the Maori. People estimated the wall was 330,000 years old, like Neville Richie said, but it was built by an unknown civilization. That's the end of the mystery, right? No way! An unofficial team of archaeologists and geologists wanted to squash the conspiracy theories for good. They went to the wall with shovels and did an illegal excavation. Those were some hardcore scientists. The team dug a trench along the front of the wall, tracing the stone all the way to the bedrock. The excavation confirmed the blocks had never moved. They were 100% natural, and Barry was wrong. Even after the excavation, the debate rages over the authenticity of the Kaimanawa wall. Do you think it's a prehistoric megalith made by human hands, or nothing but cold, natural stone? Let me know in the comments. An ancient city under Missouri? There is an antediluvian city buried beneath Missouri. This story is so crazy, so unbelievable, it's almost too much not to believe. In the 1880s, Moberly was the largest city in Randolph County, Missouri. It had a bustling population of around 6,100. Not too bad for the 19th century. According to newspaper articles from 1885, coal miners were sinking a shaft 360 feet deep below the city when they broke into a cavern. The miners were shocked by what they found. The cavern contained a buried city. There were massive walls of stone and crumbling masonry for as far as the eye could see. There was also lava. Lava arches stretched across the roof of the cavern, threatening to flood the whole place with liquid fire. The workers who had busted into the cavern continued into it, helpless to resist their curiosity. If it was you, could you resist the temptation to explore such an amazing ruin? The workers came across statues, courtyards, water fountains, and random skeletons. It was as if they had stumbled upon an underground version of Pompeii. Only the skeletons they found were clearly not human. The bones looked like they belonged to people 3 or 4 times larger than the average man. This was an underground city of giants. The workers noticed that the objects they were seeing scattered throughout the city were not particularly advanced. They found knives and metal saws, but they were primitive and unpolished. For example, simple hammers made from crudely carved chunks of granite. The civilization was clearly an ancient one, but not technologically superior to other ancient cultures. This unbelievable story appeared in the New York Times. Here's a picture of the actual newspaper clipping from April 9, 1885. The article said the explorers spent 12 hours in the buried city, leaving only when their oil lamps started to burn low. And that was it. That was the whole story. The article ended by saying an extended search would be launched in a few days. There is no record of that extended search. If it happened, it was never written about or published in any newspaper. And in case you were wondering, the answer is no. This was not an April Fool's joke. It was a real article in what you expect to be a trustworthy publication. Dr. Tom Spencer from Northwest Missouri State University doesn't think the story is true. Tom said that after printing the story, the newspaper likely tried to forget about it. Tom claimed that in the 1880s, a lot of newspaper stories were written based on nothing but hearsay. In essence, anything anybody said could be turned into a story in the New York Times if it was interesting enough. So is there really a buried city beneath Moberly? Or is this an example of old newspapers trying to sell more copies? Adam's calendar is ancient. The oldest calendar in the world might also be the oldest structure on the planet ever built by human hands. It's called Adam's calendar, a fitting name if I say so myself. Some researchers believe the calendar is 75,000 years old. You may have heard about this shocking monument before. It's casually known as the African Stonehenge because it does sort of look like Stonehenge, only in Africa. The monument is a large stone circle almost 100 feet in diameter. It's enormous. You can find the ancient megalith for yourself in Mpumalanga, South Africa. It is one of many, with recent estimates saying there are more than 100,000 stone circles spread across South Africa, most of them destroyed. Nobody even knew about Adam's calendar until 2003, when pilot Johann Hein saw it from the air. At first, experts dismissed the ruin as nothing but a cattle enclosure. They thought it was something built by the indigenous Bantu people in the 14th century. But that's just not the case. The structure is guarded by massive dolomite stones weighing 5 tons each. It is without a doubt a stone circle. One built by who? It's hard to convey just how big of a mystery this has been for the last 20 years. No one has been able to pinpoint its origin. Although it was Michael Tellinger who first claimed the structure is 75,000 years old, his sentiment has been mimicked by other researchers. Normally, mainstream scientists would dismiss this kind of speculation as nonsense, but they haven't been much help. Nobody has come up with a confirmed solution for the age or purpose of Adam's calendar. It might just date to long before the flood. As for why it's being called a calendar, researchers are saying it loosely aligns with the celestial world. They've guessed it was used as a cosmic observatory by a lost civilization. The standing stones of Al-Rajajil. If you thought Adam's calendar was a mystery, you're going to fall out of your chair at the Al-Rajajil standing stones. These things are very unusual. The stones almost look like they fell from the sky, landing in the desert of Saudi Arabia from 1,000 miles up. The Al-Rajajil standing stones is not a single monument. There are more than 50 different groups of standing stones that make up this archaeological wonder. Each of the groups is a cluster of 4 or 5 massive stone columns. They are typically attached at their bases, leaning slightly at random angles. Some of them have completely fallen over. Some are standing relatively straight. They don't appear to serve any kind of purpose. Researchers don't think they were burials or funerary markers. They could have had something to do with astronomy, but that's what archaeologists always say when they don't understand something. The truth is most likely a lot weirder than anything anyone has even guessed yet. When it comes to dating, the speculation is all over the place. The standing stones are at least 6,000 years old, perhaps even older. They are scattered across one of the oldest land routes in human history. The clusters of standing stones are in the Al-Juf region of Arabia, along a road that ran from Yemen, hugging the edge of the Red Sea into Damascus. But the two likely aren't connected. The standing stones were already falling over before the Arabian trade network was founded. Whichever civilization built them was already extinct. Sunken Indian secrets. In 2001, the National Institute of Ocean Technology in India discovered evidence of a civilization lost for 12,000 years. The scientists made this discovery at the bottom of the sea, in the Gulf of Cambay near Gujarat. It's been more than 20 years, and scientists are still arguing over the authenticity of the sunken city. The scientists weren't scanning the sea in search of lost cities. They weren't trying to change history. They were as shocked as everyone else when their sonar readings picked up structures along the bottom of the sea. These were not natural structures, no way. They had perfectly sculpted lines, staircases, and streets separating them. After analyzing the sonar images, it became clear a pair of megalithic cities had sunk beneath the waves a really long time ago. Researchers were so excited by the discovery that they launched a campaign to collect artifacts from the bottom of the sea. They did manage to get some relics from the ruins and bring them to the surface. Those artifacts were then carbon dated to 7,500 BC. That's almost 10,000 years old. All the most famous civilizations most people know about hadn't even existed then. Greece, Rome, Egypt, none of them were around yet. The cities could be even older. Ancient Sangam literature speaks of a mysterious civilization that was lost to the sea 12,000 years ago. The Indian story is completely independent of Plato and his story of Atlantis, but it's the same. The Indian texts and Plato's writings are describing the same lost culture. Controversial researcher Graham Hancock had to get to the bottom of this mystery. He traveled to Tamil Nadu and dove down to the ruins of the cities. There, he found unmistakable stone structures. There were obviously buildings in the murk made from manufactured blocks. All the evidence points to the discovery being legitimate. The different sources agree that there are cities on the seabed off the coast of India, and they have been there for at least 9,500 years. You have to assume the civilization had already been around for a few millennia prior to the sinking. They didn't emerge and sink in the same breath. That means they were likely around before the flood, placing them in the antediluvian age. But who were they? Could one of these sunken cities be Atlantis? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The impossible age of Göbekli Tepe. I can't talk about pre-flood ruins without mentioning Göbekli Tepe, the archaeological site in Turkey that is 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. Even if you've heard of this place before, you might not know what I'm about to tell you. Göbekli Tepe is a hill, a big dusty mound in a very hot place. It gets so hot here that it prevents archaeologists from investigating anything during the summer. Due to its isolation and environment, only about 5% of it has been excavated. It's considered the oldest sophisticated archaeological site in the world, yet researchers haven't even scratched the surface. When Göbekli Tepe was built an estimated 12,000 years ago, its dusty hill was likely a lot greener. Turkey had a milder climate and was populated by herds of wild animals. In this paradise, this proverbial Eden, a mysterious culture flourished. There is no name for the culture that lived here before the flood, assuming Göbekli Tepe stood before God or the Anunnaki or nature itself unleashed the deluge. Researchers know nothing about them except that they were incredibly intelligent. Compared to Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe is like the Sistine Chapel. Göbekli Tepe is rich in artwork, statues, walls, an open courtyard, pillars, roof supports, the whole 9 yards. Over the past few years, as scientists have been learning more about it, the whole perception of human evolution has changed. The most commonly accepted timeline for human evolution places our ancestors in caves 12,000 years ago. North America, Asia, Europe, Africa, Australia, all populated by hunter-gatherers. Cavemen who bonked people with wooden clubs and grunted like animals. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's true that they had access to minimal technology. Minimal technology as in maybe a loincloth, maybe some sandals, and perhaps a sharp stone attached to the end of a long stick. That was the extent of technology across the globe. But not at Göbekli Tepe. Whoever built this archaic example of megalithic architecture was able to carve stone with the same precision as the Egyptians when they built their temples thousands of years later. Do you have a good explanation for Göbekli Tepe's age? If so, be sure to share in the comments. Alien skulls. In 2012, the world was supposed to end, according to the Maya calendar, but it didn't. Instead, archaeologists in Mexico's Sonora state discovered 25 alien skulls in a cemetery more than 1,000 years old. At least the skulls looked alien. According to excavator Cristina Garcia Moreno, the skulls showed deformities. 13 out of the 25 skulls were grossly deformed, though Moreno admitted she wasn't sure why. She and her colleagues at Arizona State University analyzed the skulls, dating them to roughly 945 AD. Scientists believe the skulls were created through something known as cranial deformation. This ancient population would have put beams of wood on the front and the back of somebody's head and then wrapped the wooden beams with bands of fabric. The pressure this put on the skull would have caused it to grow obtusely. As an adult, these people would walk around with heads that looked like giant eggplants. It may have been a way for certain groups of people to distinguish themselves from another group. They could have gone with fashionable pins or maybe a unique hairstyle. It feels a little over the top to completely change the shape of their heads. Cranial deformation is the mainstream theory, but that doesn't mean it's correct. The world being flat was the mainstream theory for centuries, don't forget. If people really wanted to distinguish themselves from another group, why haven't more skulls like these ones been found? These were the first alien-looking skulls ever discovered in Sonora, making them a total anomaly. But they aren't the only alien skulls out there. Around 1930, an unusual skull was discovered in a mine tunnel about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. It was buried alongside a normal human skeleton, which was discovered lying face up in the tunnel. The skull was so strange that it quickly gained the attention of the worldwide scientific community. It ended up being examined by a dentist, who identified it as the skull of a child who died around 5 years old. That was according to the teeth, but the brain cavity was otherworldly. The skull's interior was big enough to hold a brain even larger than a standard adult brain. So the skull is from a child that had a brain bigger than an adult. That's weird. Also, the skull has no frontal sinuses. The optic nerve canal was in the wrong spot. The back of the skull was flat as a board. Lloyd Pye, an expert in all things paranormal and extraterrestrial, brought the skull to the attention of the public. He claimed that the skull belonged to an alien-human hybrid, specifically the offspring of an alien man and a human woman. Ever since, this mysterious skull has been used as proof that there was a civilization of man-alien creatures in Mexico 1,000 years ago. Every time a weird skull is found, like the ones in Sonora, it adds to the credibility of this story. In truth, though, scientists have disproved the theory repeatedly. Neurologist Stephen Novella from Yale said the cranium exhibits the characteristics of congenital hydrocephalus. This is a tragic condition that deforms the cranium when cerebrospinal fluid builds up in the skull. In 1999, a forensics DNA lab in Vancouver, Canada, confirmed the child to be male and human. More DNA testing in 2003 traced the child's lineage to a group of Native Americans. With all the tests that have been done, would you say that disproves the skull as being from a pre-flood alien-human culture of hybrids? Çatalhöyük. One of the oldest known archaeological sites, other than Göbekli Tepe, is Çatalhöyük, dating to at least 9,500 years ago. Would you be surprised to learn that it too is in Turkey? It's really starting to feel like Turkey was home to a pre-flood civilization. Or at least Turkey is the one place where evidence of such a civilization is continuously discovered. Çatalhöyük is an enigma that has been excavated continuously since 1958. Each year, archaeologists find something new. They most recently found a temple from 8,200 years ago. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. Excavations have revealed 18 successive layers of the city. So let me break down just what that means. If you were to dig underneath New York City, you would likely find remnants of the old New York City from when the European settlers arrived. And if you were to dig under that, you might find evidence of a Native American city going back even further in time. Most cities are built atop the ruins of the city before that, and some have more layers than others. At Çatalhöyük, there are 18 layers. The bottommost layer that has been found so far has buildings from about 9,100 years ago. The uppermost layer, the one closest to the surface, has buildings from about 7,600 years ago. All these layers prove the city was built, rebuilt, renovated, destroyed, and built again over thousands of years. But just how deep does it go? Will archaeologists eventually get to a layer that predates the flood? It is definitely a possibility. Somehow, the deeper archaeologists dig, the more sophisticated the city becomes. It used to be that there weren't any streets in Çatalhöyük. Archaeologists were shocked that they couldn't even find one road in a city that's population exceeded around 7,000 people. And then they found one after more than 61 years of excavations. It goes to show that the experts still have a long way to go before revealing the full history of one of the oldest settlements in the world. The temple I mentioned at the beginning doesn't predate the flood, but it might belong to a religion that does. According to Associate Professor Ali Umut Turkan, the temple is complete with an altar area, benches adorned with bull heads, wall paintings, and something really weird. When Çatalhöyük was abandoned around 5700 BC, the temple was completely filled. It was as if the people wanted to bury it forever. But why? Scientists don't know much about the culture of Çatalhöyük. They don't know how far back it goes or if it has any relation to the culture that built Göbekli Tepe. It's believed their religion was focused on a mother goddess and that they were ruled by powerful women, not men. Could this religion be a remnant of an antediluvian society? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Were the pyramids built before or after the flood? One of the world's most famous megaliths that doesn't quite fit the accepted historical timeline is one you are familiar with. The Great Pyramid of Giza and its neighbor, the Sphinx, may be leftovers from before the flood. The current accepted timeline is this. Historians say the pyramid was built around 2550 BC. According to the Bible, Noah's flood occurred around 2350 BC. According to the Sumerians, the flood happened in 11,000 BC. To make matters even more confusing, recent studies have suggested the Sphinx was built in 7000 BC. How is anybody supposed to know what to believe? The recent study involving the Sphinx is really fascinating. Scientists found that the upper areas of the Sphinx are damaged by precipitation weathering. In other words, it rained so hard that the Sphinx's back was heavily eroded. The idea behind the Sphinx being older than it appears started in the 1950s with a French mystic named Schwaller de Lubitsch. He speculated that the Sphinx had been badly damaged by the flood itself. The French mystic also claimed that the Egyptians had knowledge of Atlantis, and that they were in fact refugees from Atlantis when it sank 11,500 years ago. In 1979, Egyptologist John West was inspired by Schwaller's alternative views on history. He believed the erosion on the edges of the Sphinx was from when the Nile River flooded between 15,000 and 10,000 BC. In the 1990s, John West and geologist Robert Schoch went to Egypt together and visited the Sphinx. After an investigation, the pair agreed that the monument was at least 11,700 years old. I know that I've been throwing a ton of numbers at you, but that's just how confusing the situation is. Nobody can agree on precisely when the Great Pyramid or the Sphinx were built. Do you think the pyramids or the Sphinx are older than scientists say? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching! Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time!
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Monte dei Accodi. Sardinia is a large island in the Mediterranean famous for its beautiful beaches and pristine waters. Not many people know that it is also the home of a Neolithic site that poses more questions than answers. The ruins were discovered in 1954 on property owned by the politically prestigious Segni family and consist of a massive stone structure thought to have been used as an altar. It was built sometime between 4000 and 3650 BC by the Ozieri culture, or perhaps even an earlier civilization. The site went through many changes while it was active. Around 3000 BC, archaeologists found evidence that a fire caused significant damage, and the temple was either destroyed or abandoned. Then, in 2800 BC, the remains of the original structure were paved over using a mixture of earth and stone, and a new platform was established using large blocks of limestone. A 10-meter-high step pyramid was erected on top of the new platform. At the onset of the Nuragic Age, around 1800 BC, Monte dei Accodi was permanently abandoned. Several other cryptic stone carvings and structures were excavated nearby during the 1960s, including a megalithic tomb known as a dolmen and the possible remains of residential buildings. The remains of sheep, cattle, and swine were found at the site, indicating that at some point it was used for animal sacrifice. It is one of the oldest known sacrificial sites in Western Europe and has helped researchers learn about the establishment of rituals in the prehistoric world. The structures at Monte dei Accodi may have also been used as an ancient astronomical observatory. However, the full story behind the site's construction and use is still being pieced together. Göbekli Circle. Located on farmland in Göbekli, Germany, the Göbekli Circle is an early Neolithic structure known as a ring ditch and is believed to be the oldest of the circular enclosures of the Central European Neolithic Age. How's that? Radiocarbon dating shows that it was built by Europe's first civilization sometime during the 49th century BC and was used until the 47th century BC, long before the societies of ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia existed, earning it the modern-day nickname of German Stonehenge. The people who built Göbekli Circle were called the stroke-ornamented ware culture and were named after pottery fragments they left behind. Little else is known about this civilization, including what they looked like or what their language was like. Göbekli Circle was first discovered in modern times during an aerial survey that was being conducted by inspectors from the German government in 1991. At the time, they simply noticed a circular ridge beneath a field, and for the next 12 or so years, no one really paid any attention. In 2002, after archaeologists realized that Göbekli Circle was not a simple fortification like they had previously assumed, a major excavation ensued. They quickly noticed that its entrances are aligned with the sunrise and sunset of the winter solstice, suggesting that the structure may have been the world's first solar observatory. During the dig, they not only found evidence of prehistoric stargazing, but of ritual sacrifice, including headless human skeletons, decapitated oxen, bones containing cut marks, and the remnants of fires. Researchers determined that the original site was 75 meters in diameter and consisted of 2 wooden fences, a mound, and 4 concentric circles. Despite the initial lack of interest in Göbekli Circle, it's now one of the most thoroughly studied ring ditches out of the 250 that are known to exist throughout Germany, Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, and the Czech Republic. Bimini Road. In the waters off the Bahamian island of North Bimini, there's an underwater rock formation known as the Bimini Road, or the Bimini Wall. At first glance, the half-mile-long arrangement of rectangular and subrectangular limestone blocks appears to be man-made. There have been several theories about what the stretch of blocks actually is. Experts have speculated that it's a road, a wall, a breakwater, or a pier from an ancient civilization. But if so, then which one? The formation was discovered in 18-foot deep water by 3 divers in 1968. Since then, it has been visited by a variety of experts, including anthropologists, marine engineers, geologists, and archaeologists. A lot of people hoped or even believed that the Bimini Road was a remnant of the lost city of Atlantis. This turned out to be wishful thinking in more than one way. The first bit of disappointing news came when the scientific community decided that the Bimini Road was formed naturally and is not, in fact, man-made. While the stones seem to have been assembled deliberately, there were no signs of this having actually been the case. Additionally, carbon dating failed to yield any indicators that the stones were anything but naturally occurring. And I'm kind of sad to say this, but mounting evidence over the years has caused many, if not most, credible researchers to cast doubt on Atlantis having ever existed, or in some cases to outright dismiss it as a myth. So, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it looks like the Bimini Road is a natural formation, and it looks like the scientific community is also doubting Atlantis was real. The stones at Galilee. In the summer of 2003, an enormous structure was detected during a sonar survey of the southwestern portion of the Sea of Galilee, and divers were summoned to check it out. When they got a closer look, they observed a cone-shaped cairn, or a monument that was built by piling rocks on top of one another. The basalt structure measured about 32 feet high, with a diameter of 230 feet, making it taller than even the tallest stones at Stonehenge and twice the diameter of the outer circle at the famous ruin site. While structures like this have been found in other parts of the world and sometimes represent burial sites, experts aren't quite sure what this one was for. Elements of the investigation and research were covered in a 2013 issue of the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology. Although the stones showed no signs of having been altered with tools and were assembled without a detectable construction method, the researchers concluded that the structure is man-made. They also believe it was built on land and was later consumed by rising sea levels. There's a lot left to learn about the monument, including when it was built and by whom. Researchers believe it may be at least 4,000 years old. Finding more artifacts at the site would be helpful for determining its age, but until a thorough excavation is carried out, even the experts can do little more than speculate. The Yonaguni Monument. The Yonaguni Monument is a mysterious sandstone rock formation located on the seabed of the waters off Yonaguni, Japan. Whether the monument is man-made or natural has been a source of debate ever since its discovery in 1968 by a director from the Yonaguni-cho Tourism Association named Kihachiro Aratake. He was out exploring the waters looking for hammerhead sharks. Following the discovery, the site was visited by a group of scientists led by Masaki Kimura, a professor and marine biologist. After diving and exploring the site for more than 15 years, Kimura held tight to his belief that the giant submerged rocks represent the ruins of a so-called Japanese Atlantis that was sunk into the ocean by an earthquake around 2,000 years ago. According to a National Geographic article from 2007, Kimura had only become more convinced over time that he was studying the remains of a 5,000-year-old once bustling urban center. Kimura's claims have been criticized by some experts, including a professor of mathematics and science at Boston University named Robert Scotch, who has visited the site firsthand and remains convinced that it's a naturally formed set of rocks. Scotch believes that features of the rocks that cause them to appear man-made to some people, such as their straight edges, can be explained by natural phenomena, such as the tendency for sandstone to break along an even plane. The general consensus appears to be on the side of Mr. Scotch, at least as far as official opinions go. Yonaguni is not recognized as a culturally or historically significant site by the government of Okinawa Prefecture or the government's Agency for Cultural Affairs, a stance that was made clear in 2007 by the agency's then spokeswoman, Emiko Ishida. But maybe, just maybe, the skeptics and naysayers are wrong. After all, it's unlikely that a man as educated as Masaki Kimura would believe so strongly that he'd found something of value that was, in fact, essentially worthless, or so one would think. It wouldn't be the first time the scientific community would be wrong, like when they said the boiling river in the Amazon didn't exist either. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. One of Africa's oldest and most stunning archaeological sites, known as the Great Zimbabwe Ruins, was built 900 years ago and is home to a collection of massive stone complexes. The 1,800-acre site is located in southeastern Zimbabwe. Most of the buildings were made from granite using an advanced masonry technique called dry stonewalling. The ancient city took around 300 years to build, and at its peak boasted around 18,000 inhabitants. Great Zimbabwe was also probably a royal city that was used as a palace by the monarch. Others have theorized that the buildings were separated into 3 groups because they had different purposes, with the hill possibly serving as the temple, the great enclosure as housing for royalty, and the valley as a residential complex. The artifacts that have been excavated at Great Zimbabwe have helped archaeologists learn what they can about the people who live there. Among the things they've uncovered are soapstone carvings, pottery, gold jewelry, decorative ivory, and iron gongs. The city was eventually abandoned, but nobody knows why. Halsaflieni hypogeum. The Halsaflieni hypogeum, or the hypogeum for short, can be found in the modern-day Maltese town of Paola. In Greek, hypogeum means underground, which is an appropriate name for this Neolithic subterranean temple and necropolis. The hypogeum was actively used from 4000 BC to 2500 BC, making it the world's oldest known prehistoric underground temple. It was discovered in 1902 when construction workers accidentally cut through the roof. In 1991, after nearly 90 years of failed on and off preservation attempts, the site closed for a decade for renovations. The hypogeum is now open to the public and is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The temple contains 3 levels, all of which are carved out of stone. Scientists have uncovered the remains of over 7,000 people in the uppermost level, which contains large burial chambers. Not surprisingly, the site is also rumored to be a hotspot for paranormal activity. The arguably most fascinating feature of the hypogeum is its incredible acoustic technology, which can be experienced on its lowest level in an area known as the Oracle Chamber. The Oracle Chamber was carved almost entirely out of limestone. When a person uses their voice in there, they can be heard throughout the entire hypogeum. So don't start screaming or anything. The structure at McDonald Lake. In 2005, divers working on a submarine project in Ontario's Lake McDonald discovered a bizarre assemblage of heavy stones that they initially assumed was a geological formation. At the bottom of the lake, an elongated rock weighing around 1,000 pounds sat on top of 7 baseball-sized stones. Although the rock formation didn't seem to be the product of human creativity at first, one thing did stand out about it. Unlike the rounded rocks that had been weathered by glaciers, the structure's massive top piece had straight, even edges and was flat. An underwater archaeologist took a closer look and determined that the monument was, in fact, man-made. Pretty much everything else about it, including who made it and why, remains a mystery. No tools or other artifacts have been recovered from nearby. The biggest clues are the thick layer of silt covering the rocks, indicating that they haven't been touched in an extremely long time. There was a drought that occurred in North America sometime during 9000 and 7000 BC, which lowered the water levels of the lake, a logical window of time for when the stone structure may have been built. Very few people lived in the area at the time, which only deepens the mysteries surrounding the strange monument's origins. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. There's more where that came from. See you next time!